Welcome back to Logs and Lattes. I'm your host, Palmer Wallace. Today we're looking at 2025 through the eyes of analysts, engineers, and security leaders who spent the year wrestling with rising alert volume, shrinking budgets, and a wave of AI tooling that showed up faster than most teams were ready for. 2025 taught us something uncomfortable, but important. Teams aren't drowning because they lack data. They're drowning because the work needed to interpret that data keeps multiplying. And 2026 is shaping up to be the year where clarity, trustworthy AI, flexible workflows, and cost-governed visibility separate the teams who stay ahead from the teams who fall further behind. To unpack all of this, I'm joined by someone who's been shoulder to shoulder with lean SOC teams, trying to do more with what they already have. Jeff Darrington, Director of Technical Marketing. Jeff, great to have you.
Thanks for having me in.
So, Jeff, you've said in the past that 2025 was the year where teams hit maximum load. What made it such a breaking point for those lean SOC teams?
2025 continually forced teams to confront issues they've sometimes been postponing for years, but it hit them right in the face. Things aren't slowing down. Noise is outpacing staffing when it comes to cybersecurity. Analysts were not just busy, but they were constantly behind. They're looking at multiple tools with multiple alerts, and they live through, context nowhere in particular. So they're trying to gather all this information. The big one is AI arrives with everyone, and everyone takes advantage of it. But the literacy and oversight was a little bit behind. Everybody was all sitting in the background. Individual ones that were using AI explicitly were learning how to use it very, very well. But teams are given AI features without real guardrails. They needed to trust and supervise those guardrails. But people were confident enough to rely on AI, but skeptical enough to question it as well. Tool sprawl is always a thing. It involves multiple tools needing to pivot to gather information. Things don't always feel integrated, so you've got different ways of collecting data and pulling it together. In some of that, obviously with tool sprawl comes cloud costs. You can have cloud sprawl, which is similar to tool sprawl. It can be a security constraint because teams will often choose to store logs or store information based on cost and what the risk might not be or will be in doing it that way. It's not really sustainable, but teams realized resilience can't really rely on headcount. When costs are a problem, you're not going to get those individual heads to do the jobs. So they need better workflows and bigger teams. That aligns actually with some of Gartner's reports of observation that SIEM and the product's value curve has shifted away from raw, pure, just collect as much data as you can towards dedicated content and workflows and cost control so that you can have a budget that's movable. So 2025 exposes quite the reality in the field. And it's obviously something that's always a concern.
You mentioned how these smaller teams, they realized resilience. They can't exactly lean just on lean teams, no pun intended. Now with that, obviously you then began incorporating more of the AI tools, trying to get more context out of those alerts and those dashboards. There's a dashboard for nearly everything, every tool that you've got. How do you then integrate all of them together? And with that, analysts didn't exactly seem to feel like any of their decisions were made easier or have like a one-click approach. What exactly happened there? Why was that the case?
I'm one of those guys. I'm a dashboard creator. I love dashboards, but at the end of the day, dashboards need to be built for the targeted audience. A CISO or someone at a higher level that needs to see a dashboard might be a little bit different than a security analyst or in a SOC. Analysts have stated that they spend more time summarizing dashboards than actually using them. And, you couldn't quickly answer, okay, I saw this dashboard yesterday and now I see it today, but I don't remember what I saw yesterday. So what am I seeing today that's different from yesterday that I need to really understand? Clutter and overloaded cognitive bandwidth is a thing. Um, Dashboards weren't necessarily aligned to incident flow as well. So they were a little bit probably disjointed. Uh, you've got to make sure that your dashboards allow you to want to pivot directly and get into an investigation or dig deeper. They don't want to necessarily just have 20 or 40 widgets. They want something that's briefing them about a particular signal or a change or a suggested action based on the data that you're seeing. Gartner has basically reinforced this, that buyers want to have flexibility and extensibility and a workflow alignment so that, aesthetic dashboards aren't necessarily the top priority. Don't get me wrong. I love a great looking dashboard. I am a bit of a dashboard guy, but that dashboard has to be able to pivot very quickly to valuable insights.
In terms of, I think that as an industry as a whole, the ability to detect things and get alerts and react is not necessarily the issue, and has, I guess, ultimately never really been the issue, but it's the ability to actually prioritize and respond well to those alerts and to those signals. Um, what have you seen essentially over this past year in terms of how teams have been able to prioritize and actually get to the root of what essentially is causing business risk?
There's a lot of chatter, and I've seen a lot of chatter publicly about not having enough skilled analysts. Um, I don't necessarily believe that. I mean, obviously, someone new coming in the industry is going to have a more of a junior sort of environment they're going to be working in. But most incidents don't stall because analysts are not skilled enough. They're stalled because the process is inconsistent when they're actually investigating a particular incident, especially with smaller teams, because you've got, experience changes across the team. But if you have, unclear steps, first steps, or scattered context around what really something means or who might be impacted or involved in the particular incident, if you have inconsistent escalation paths or handoffs between people, then that can change the speed in which things get dealt with. And there's no shared definition really of done, which done typically can be right all the way out to root cause analysis. So, I mean, you've had an incident, you recovered from it, and you wipe your brow and you're like, okay, good, the next thing. But at the end of the day, if you're not learning from the incident how to potentially eliminate it from happening in the future, or make it very minimal that you could even have it in the future, it's pretty important. Teams really thrive when they adopt structured response patterns. The response patterns don't necessarily have to be really intricate in detail. They just have to have a really good process flow, very similar to DevOps teams, how when they have outages, they're very small, repeatable, predictable things that they execute on to try to come to ending the incident. Gartner had a point they made in SIEM's long-term strength, that it's not just ingestion, it's the ability to codify your workflows and orchestrate decisions and tools like XDR and EDR and identity systems. So response clarity is definitely a differentiator in 2025, and honestly, moving ahead, it's one of the most important things.
Have you found that things like an OODA loop or other type practices, especially from a process standpoint, are able to kind of help them create more of that flow and react in a more efficient manner as opposed to just, oh, there's an alert, deal with this fire. Oh my goodness, there's an alert, deal with another fire. Have you heard just offhand other teams and what processes have worked for them in the past?
I mean, a lot of people will follow industry standard sort of playbooks and response plans as long as you're readily available to them. So your teams have to train. Your team should do some tabletop exercises to kind of go through. There's a good categorization of incidents that are more attack based that you could simulate through on a table and go, okay, here's playbook one for email compromise or whatever. Those things really help. I did them for many, many years in previous roles, and it's surprising how quick people who are non-IT, when they're involved in these, like senior management, other departments that aren't directly IT, but their systems, if they go down, they're impacted, they can learn quite a bit from as well and understand the terminology, understand the technology. So it really, really does help in the gap of skills or that time old story. I clicked this email and I shouldn't have clicked this link kind of approach. So you do all the cybersecurity awareness training in the world and people implement it, but there's people still clicking links. So, I mean, it's still a thing, unfortunately.
I guess then that comes back full circle to the concept of more or less building that culture of cyber awareness as opposed to or cybersecurity awareness as opposed to just to your point, maybe once a quarter, once a year, having that training that goes out to those individuals for uh, phishing attacks and things along those lines. But it's actually just making it a recurring thing. That way, top to bottom, any person in the org actually has an understanding of how they could then play a factor in creating business risk.
That's right. Well, and then it also too highlights, if you're doing all this cyber awareness training and there's some key things that unfortunately people are still getting tricked to clicking links or something, then you really evaluate what additional kinds of tools you need in the cybersecurity toolbox to help stop that. So you only know your own organization based on the things you're doing. So if you keep seeing in those training exercises or those fake campaigns where you make it tailored with all the different products we have out there to help people try to be more cyber resilient, then you have to make hard choices on certain kinds of tools. So you're like, okay, 20% of the staff of this particular organization continue to click these links that are trained fully up on what you should and shouldn't do when it comes to that. So you have to make a hard decision, unfortunately, with some of the budget and training. The human is the weakest point, unfortunately, and that's not a statement to say anything on an individual. It's, they prey on feelings, and some of those emails and different things can really trick someone in there.
Yeah, and it's sad to say, I think no matter what, the human element will always be candidly the weakest link to that equation. But speaking of hard choices and hard decisions, often CISOs and just in general, companies are having to make difficult security decisions based on budgeting around whatever security applications they have in house. And over the years, increasingly even in 2025, it sounds like cloud spending has kind of quietly dictated what is done, what is not done, how much do they want to spend, or how little there is to spend. What do you feel like has driven that within this last year?
Cloud adoption is increasing. Obviously, there are certain environments where cloud can't be used in certain real high secure closed environments. But governance became part of the cyber resilience. Teams learned that, storing logs that you may have to rehydrate later on for investigations can trigger surprise bills if you're not understanding the data that you need and you're pulling more data in that you might need versus what you do need. They needed data tiers of data, so your hot, warm, compliance-based data that's stored for extended periods of time, with legal holds and all kinds of other things. I'm in archives for that example as well. The important thing with archives and how long they should be stored. Visibility across your whole landscape, whether you're in one building, multiple buildings, or multiple cities, continents, for centralized storage. But multi-cloud made data handling even more fragmented, especially in an organization that has multi-prem and multi-region. So it gets tricky managing that data. So cloud becomes sort of an easy way to implement centralized storage for the data. But in the same token, Gartner did mention that modern SIEM value isn't just about holding all of the data, but having access to the data that you need through some form of pipelines and cheaper storage. So when you're in a hybrid environment and the data is a little bit fragmented, it really makes cloud a very easy choice when it comes to that sort of thing. 2025 taught teams that, designing visibility with cost predictability built in is very key.
And with that predictability, the hope is that also then it makes kind of the troops on the ground, if you will, the analysts, having that a bit of an easier air quote workday than constantly just perpetually putting out fires and feeling like they're on this treadmill leading to nowhere. But it also sounds like, at least in 2025, the analyst experience, if you will, AX, became a KPI for a lot of these companies. What do you feel like changed in this last year in 2025, and why do you feel like that's the case?
AI has been had a big impact on the way people use products. Front-ended AI capable products are really starting to change the game. But at the end of the day, when someone's getting their hands on the tools and they're getting in the down and dirty of investigating, AX is the difference between teams that triaged confidently and teams that felt a little bit underwater. Analysts have mentioned things like that they're constantly reconstructing context and trying to add additional context. So, field lookups or required tool hopping to get additional context creates delay, creates, some questionable data when you mix it together and trying to make sure it lines up with the story that you're trying to tell or that you think is being told. Schema across different kinds of searches or different kind of data, you really have to map that manually if you're not keeping a constant schema so that it's much easier to understand what's going on. New hires do take time to reach autonomy with this kind of approach and data. It's a lot to learn. But senior analysts work in a completely different way. A lot of times they have knowledge and expertise that they are able to pivot on their own and define things up front and have a lot more tools in their brain to kind of work through some of those things. But as you improve AX and movement through tools, things like entity views or table search patterns or right-click context to bounce into data deep in to try to find out what's going on. Anything that's repeatable that allows you to very quickly dive in and get real value becomes, something that everyone likes in an AX. Gartner mentioned something to this regarding the ease of use and flexibility and cost control are now one of the bigger SIM differentiators in the raw, like direct features. So AX is a leading indicator, I think, in SOC health and being to drill into data and get answers right away, really right away, especially in 2025 and moving forward.
Mentioning moving forward, we spent a fair amount of time discussing the current year, 2025, but even looking forward into 26, I've been seeing that, some places are predicting that there's going to be this shift from big data to quote unquote smart data. Are you starting to see that these conversations are already taking place or that people are mentioning this?
I honestly think so. And it really depends on the collect everything approach. Obviously, you're going to be able to find the things you need when you do that. But that can get very costly in an environment where you need instant response to looking up or searches and looking up data and wanting the answers right away. So it can somewhat collapse under the weight of that. It's a lot of data. There are organizations, large organizations that can, carry that on a little bit further, but budgets are key when it comes to keeping that data. The idea of smart data is collecting data intentionally so that you have specific use of it, that you're aligning your logs or data to very specific use cases. And when you get the data, you want to enrich that data early so that additional context is there immediately. And you can focus on the entities themselves. And AI right now is a good way to validate your data value. So if you have data, you have a suspect of what you believe has occurred. Utilizing AI to interpret the data really helps the analysts tell the story of what they think have seen or what they've found. Gartner mentioned this as well. I keep bringing it up. Gartner's had some really good points regarding SIM value, that it's shifting from massive data to workflow and enrichment. So if you don't have the enrichment, then you don't have the intelligence. Intelligence is all those data points from a combination of individual assets, their connections to individual users that are using the assets. It could be GeoIP, a whole other range of things. But 2026 will probably be the year teams start looking at how much data they're bringing in and start to tweak what they're bringing in and what their outcome is going to be based on what their volume is. So I think people are really starting to evaluate what they're bringing in and looking at where the value is to bring it in first.
API exposure was something else that I had kind of heard about with API security, obviously, but it's growing, especially with the implementation of AI and LLMs into workflows. It seems to be now growing faster than what teams are actually able to track, based on conversations you've been having, not just with our customer bases, but even potential other colleagues. What have you been hearing in regard to that?
APIs, I wouldn't say they're necessarily the new perimeter. They have always been a perimeter, but the proliferation of the growth of APIs and what they can do across multiple platforms really bring a level of risk. We're seeing untracked or forgotten endpoints. If someone was sort of the prime of looking after this particular integration, and with budget cuts and people, individuals maybe getting laid off or moving to other roles, maybe the inventory on that stuff isn't as kept as easy as a physical asset. Permissions may be given a little bit too heavy of functionality for service accounts that allow a little bit more stuff to kind of process that shouldn't be processing. Internal sort of east-west traffic, API data, and zero visibility. That's kind of scary. You have to understand how much of that data is potentially exposed with certain levels of access. The logic abuse that looks normal until you zoom out and realize, okay, there's something a little deeper here. 2026 will push teams to look probably more into gateway logging, into API behavior modeling, and understand the risk of what is communicating through those APIs. All you have to ask yourself is, okay, what if I could find some type of vulnerability on this API and pull a bunch of data? What potentially could be in that data? And when you integrate all the systems, whether it's banking, whether it's, customer portals, anything like that, it really makes you really want to wonder, okay, how can I monitor this stuff? What can I do to ensure that the data that I have is not potentially leaving? APIs are a little different. You're used to connections, people getting in the network. You're used to people, hitting VPN connections or things like that. But APIs run kind of a lot of times just directly natively in the cloud. So you can't put your fingers on it. It's just out there running in the cloud a lot of times. So you have to have that ability to understand and monitor that. It's been an emerging attack surface, but it will always continue to be. And I don't know, I really think it's under monitored today as much as it is. It's a lot of data. And there's a lot of context on the data with the payloads that are sent within the data. So it's very important to find ways to monitor that and put some governance around it.
We have dashboards for everything, and alerts, and being able to handle that triage, and what you do when an alert occurs, and being able to move that down the line, historically has always been a human first type experience. Now with the integration of AI, potential context, and other avenues being built into those applications, at this point in time, or even, maybe 2026, 27, how close do you feel that we are to AI actually being able to handle that first pass of that triage, as opposed to then the human element having to get reintegrated?
I think we're getting closer for sure. Closer than probably a lot of SOC leaders might think. With the introduction of MCP server and all kinds of platforms, that allows plain language questions to be asked of data, and as long as those workflows are built into the MCP server, you're not really necessarily clicking your mouse. You might be just asking questions and using this thing in my face, which is a microphone. So you could just be asking questions, and it's spitting back the data that you need to know. The tech's ready. The grouping, enrichment, summarization, recommendation are there. A lot of the blockers, I think, are the trust of using it and the explainability and guardrails around it. Obviously, you have to design AI with guardrails, especially when it comes to things like MCP server and such, where you don't want those APIs, because they are APIs as well, connecting through an LLM. You don't want things exposed through that interface that obviously are going to create problems. But teams want interpretable output. They they want to override authority, but you don't want to go outside the guardrails of the authority. You want predictable behavior, and then you want clarity when the model is unsecure. So if you're using AI, you have to have a way to validate whether or not it's unsecure or not right up front, even in testing. Even in testing, you might be using a live system to try to make sure you're getting what you need. But if it's not secured, you've got to understand where that data is going. There are companies out there that are utilizing AI in prem-based environments so that you can keep it all inside. There's stuff in the cloud, so everybody has their choice of where to go with AI and what to use it for, and how to build out their own workflows. I'm going to mention Gartner here again because the AI won't reduce the SOC complexity, but it will shift the work towards complex threats and oversight of AI itself. The teams who win will treat AI like a junior analyst, or they'll treat it like an additional tool in their toolbox to ensure that it's fast and supervised. So I know there's probably a lot of disagreement around what AI is going to do and how it's going to potentially take jobs, but understanding what it can do, we're telling it what we need it to do, and we're creating things that utilize it. So when you're doing that, having an understanding of it is probably one of the most top priority things you should do when using AI.
On the subject of AI, there was a recent article that Anthropic put out regarding a recent autonomous threat that actually essentially was leveraging, as you mentioned, AI making things more complex to where you're not just having to watch your system, you're also having to watch the plugins that your system is utilizing to create this Trojan horse effect, or shadow AI essentially. And it sounds like, because of the rapid increase of this tool implementation, the concept of shadow AI became an actual legitimate concern in 2025. Where do you think we go from here? Where does this evolve to?
We are dealing with sort of non-human based actors inside these environments. You've seen the industry have internal chatbots that can store credentials for access to things to work automated workflows. Uh, Agents are making access decisions depending on how you've designed it. Scripts, scarily, and we have seen in the news, scripts have rewritten themselves. Now, if you're creating a script using AI and you're asking it to reiterate based on failures or errors or output that you want to look different, that's one thing. But if you've created these bots or these things to actually do that on its behalf, it's a living, breathing code creator that does things on its own. So that's kind of scary. That's some Terminator stuff happening right there. So the additional thing is automated traffic that no one recognizes. So if it's automated and it's constantly changing and evolving, that's where anomalies need to be detected based on that as well. 2026, I think, will, if it has not already, will require teams to inventory and monitor non-human identities for treating them like humans so that the behavior of that automation doesn't drift or change over time, so that monitoring of it is just as essential as monitoring a particular user, or things that may happen that a user does that they don't realize that are causing problems. So it won't just be for use of users, but for machines and models. So I think I don't know what that's going to look like, but that's something up and coming. I think that people are going to really want to focus on.
Speaking of Skynet and Terminator and where things could potentially go from even a sci-fi leaning influence, quantum has always kind of been part of the zeitgeist for at least the last couple of years. Now, quantum crypto isn't here yet, but it sounds like the prep has started to occur for a handful of companies. Based on even some of the side conversations you've had, what do you exactly feel like teams should kind of focus on it in that regard?
I had actually witnessed just this year, I forget what month it was. I'm trying to go back. I was at CyberX conference in Toronto the first night, and the question came up around quantum, and it brought 5 or 6 experts on the stage in real time talking about where quantum is going. It's interesting. There's a lot of really deep knowledge around quantum. And I think, outdated crypto usage is going to be a thing. Quantum is very trust oriented, and, if it doesn't trust, it drops. It's long-lived secrets that are kept, but hard-coded cert dependencies they're mapping those things out, and systems that will be really painful to update later when it comes to all those different things. So encryption is always a tricky migration, but post-quantum readiness is a lot about inventory and visibility so that what must be replaced before migration is urgent. Obviously, with quantum, the way we're building out mass storage facilities and compute facilities, it's almost going to outpace the power to provide it. So, they're looking in Canada. I mean, I'm a Canadian. In Canada, they've announced that they want to build nuclear-based plants to power these kinds of data centers. So, the prep has begun. They realize how much power is needed for quantum computing. And I think that's probably, the infrastructure is the number one thing to build it. Now, as you build it and it's up and running, that's where all these things come into play when it comes to how you migrate into something like that for those different things that I mentioned earlier.
100%. And to that point, I think that is candidly now the new arms race is energy for said data centers, whether they revolve around quantum AI or just computing in general. It feels like that is now kind of the new era of where things are heading. Now we talked about 2025 and lessons learned or kind of things we've observed, discussed 26 or even further into the future with quantum. As kind of a takeaway, if you will, or even guidance for teams actually planning for 2026, where do you feel like they should start?
Yes. So my feelings and predictions a little bit with 2026, there's a huge adoption of AI in the workplace. So there's still a lot of people that have not fully implemented. If they have, it's very shadow AI where people are experimenting on their own in the workplace. So if you are for the first time implementing it company wide for any purposes, the biggest thing in adopting it is ensuring that you have guidance and policy and you think of security in mind regarding anything to do with AI use in the workplace. I think 2026, looking back at some of the things that happened in 2025 regarding some of the hacks or outages, I really think 2026 will be harder a little bit. You'll have continued corporate AI adoption and fine tuning for the workplace efficiencies, but Forbes did cover this, that there are a variety of things that will be harder in the future. I read that article just actually this morning. So it'll be interesting. The threats aren't going to minimize. There'll be continued growth in data inside data lakes, but with the need to get search directly inside the data lake. And this is all related to cloud costs and scaling so that large amounts of data can be kept a little bit longer. So you'll need to search that data. And finally, if looking at the policy side of things, you're going to see a continued effort of global policy changes at different locations around the world, whether it's the EU, whether it's North America. It'll be changes to curb cybercrime, but also it will be a very delicate balance between implementing cybersecurity and impeding on potential privacy. So those two things are going to probably battle each other out a little bit around how much privacy there is around cybersecurity.
So it's not just the age-old adage of doing more with less, but it's actually doing more with less effectively.
Yes, absolutely.
That does it for today's episode of Logs and Lattes. 2025 pushed teams to rethink nearly every part of security operations, whereas 2026 will push even harder, especially around AI trust, API visibility, and the balance, as we spoke about, between cost and coverage. Jeff, thank you again. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to follow Graylog on LinkedIn and YouTube for more analyst-focused discussions on security operations. Until next time, stay curious, stay stay secure.